This will be a bit of a deeper dive into sex trafficking survivors and the horrors they have to face when they come out of that system. And I will be referencing specific research that I have taken, and I will be reading it straight from the doc that I have. So, most of it I already am pretty aware of, and most of it you will also be aware of too. The fact that it is an extremely specific trauma, and it's extremely hard to get help for it. But the things that many other people don't know or don't really realize is that most survivors have horrid drug addictions because their captors constantly drug them, because they want to keep them under their control. And this is really awful because it makes a sense of it keeps survivors under a sense of dependency on their captors, and it makes them constantly want to go back to them, or it makes them not want to leave because they need that drug, or because they're scared of what will happen if they don't have that drug. And this often makes survivors who have come out of the system go right back into the system because of their drug addiction. And it's a really horrible thing because it can also lead to poor dental care and other medical problems that they can't deal with on their own when they're out of the system. Another really hard thing that survivors have to grapple with is the fact that they can't do practically anything. Depending on what age you are right now, you can most likely drive. You most likely have a pretty high school education. You most likely have friends. You most likely have a bank account or have some way of getting money. Survivors, they have absolutely none of that. Most of them were taking it at a younger age or at a time where they were going through high school and they don't have that high school education. They don't have a high school degree, so they can't go to college. They can't get a job. They can't do basic things that they need at the age that they are at. And so it creates a really awful cycle because there is nothing that they can do in their minds. In their minds, they are completely helpless, and there is no way for them to do most things. Most of them can't even drive because they weren't able to have that chance to get a license, to be able to learn how to drive a car. They are completely helpless, and they are unaware of what to do. And it's really hard because a lot of the times medical professionals or mental health professionals won't help them because they see them as criminals. This is another really hard thing that they have to grapple with, because of what they have done or what they had happened to them. They are seen as having a criminal record. They are seen as a sex worker. They are seen as a drug addict. And so medical professionals don't want to help them or are unwilling to help them because they see them as a lesser than person because of what they had gone through, which is awful because it wasn't their choice. It wasn't what they wanted to do. They had no say in the matter, and yet they are still being punished for it even after they are out of the system, which is extremely irritating and extremely hard for them to deal with. Another problem that they have is just awful medical issues. Most of them have depression, they have anxiety, they have severe PTSD, along with other mental health issues that they could have had just growing up. But medical health issues, they can have a whole mass of STDs. They can have pelvic pain, rectal trauma, urinary issues, pregnancy as a result of their sex trafficking. They can have multiple abortions, forced and or otherwise. They can have infertility from chronically untreated transgenic infections. They can have scars. They can have untreated chronic illnesses. They can have they can have like STDs. They can have physical signs of trauma and abuse. Most survivors are abused by their captors, physically, mentally, and obviously sexually, and there's just like very little help left in their mind. In their mind, they are completely helpless on an island by themselves, and there's nothing that they can get help with. And it's extremely sad because there are people who can help them. It's just such a specialized form of help that it's really hard to get easy access to this. Another thing is that sex trafficking, or just trafficking in general, it can also be taking someone from one country to another. So, like, if you, actually, I'm not going to use an example. If someone was trafficked and they are taken, say, from America to a completely different country in Europe or Asia, they have no idea what to do there. It's not where they grew up. It's not where they were raised. They might not speak the language. They might not understand the culture. So when they do get out, they are even more helpless because they can't do anything. It's not the country that they were raised in. They have no way of getting back to their country without extensive help. They can't even speak the language, and it's really hard. Again, like, it's just another thing that I have to add on to. And then another thing is, for male survivors, it's even less of a chance that they will get help because of just the way that they were trafficked. Most of the time, men are under the idea that they shouldn't have mental health problems and they should be able to properly deal with their emotions, and so they don't need mental health, or they don't need help with their trauma. And it's really upsetting because they just won't seek it out at all, and so they don't get that help that they so desperately need, and so then they are just at a greater risk for going back into the system, or for other things like suicide and deep depression and just homelessness. Those are most of the biggest topics that I covered and I faced, but there are tons of other things that survivors have to deal with, and it's just a whole mess of problems and one thing after another. But there is help and there is hope for them to get that help. We just have to greatly fight for it, and we have to realize that it is a real issue, because a lot of the times sex trafficking and trafficking in general isn't talked about enough, and most people just are unaware of it, or they just don't think that it'll ever happen to them. But it is a very common issue, and it's extremely more common than one might think. And just because you grew up in a certain area doesn't mean you're more likely. Well, that's not true. But just because some of the ways that people were raised, they are under the assumption that it's not possible for them to be trafficked, or it's just not possible for them to ever be put in that position. But it's extremely possible, no matter how you were raised. It's a very serious issue, and it happens from the ages of 5 to 65. There is a very big age gap of people who are trafficked, and more people need to start having a basic understanding of what is happening to survivors and how to fight against this.